So here we are tonight with this very wonderful topic that I'm excited to bring to all of you. I knew that when I was putting this Art and Focus together that Emily was going to be my guest. And what I was so excited about that is because she's a teacher at South Shore Arts, and I know she's provided a lot of programming for adults and children that everybody really enjoys. She's got a really wonderful outlook on life. And so when I was putting this together, clay, as everybody knows, I imagine people watching this tonight, Emily, are big fans of clay and ceramics, and I think a lot of people have a lot of good things to add. And so when putting this together, one of the things that kept coming up is why is clay, why is ceramics, why is working with that so appealing? Last Art and Focus and the one before it, we were talking about the creative space, and we were talking about the idea of culture being defined by things created by human hands. And when you think about ceramics, it comes from the earth, but it's truly a human invention from the beginning to the end, in the process of finding the clay to completing the piece. Clay is a natural artistic material that connects us to the earth from beginning to end. I call it the earth, wind, rain, and fire connection. Harvesting and processing the clay, the hand building texture feelings that you get, centering on the wheel, developing structural integrity. I think this is just a lot of the ways that we connect with our clay. Have you ever done any raku firing, Emily?
Yeah, raku firing I've done quite a bit in like grad school and undergrad. I had opportunities to do it. Um, I kind of like instructing students to do it with me more so than like my own pieces are not raku fires, but it's a lot of fun to bring everybody together and then have them like precariously take like 1,000-degree pot
Mhm.
and then put it into a cool set of leaves in a trash can and then having that exploded of the fire come through. So it's always a fan favorite with students is the raku firings. So
Well, and I hear you saying something that's going to be a consistent theme throughout tonight. And the idea down here, actually, and you can see my mouse scrolling right down here, is the Cream City Clay Gals in Wisconsin, and this is their raku firing. And you were saying just now, Emily, the idea of we're going to talk a lot about communities, and the community within the ceramic scene is one that I think is very unmatched. Everybody works together in a million ways. And this slide here was just something I was having a little fun with at the beginning when I was thinking about not only the ways that human beings, I think, are connected to working with clay, whether they realize it or not. The idea of bringing the outside in is something that we've talked about in Art and Focus. I think it's something that artists do whether they realize it or not. I think that working with clay gives us healthful and physical benefits. Not just working with your hands. I've heard a lot. Have you ever had any experience with working with seniors and arthritis in their hands and working and hand building the clay?
yeah, it definitely helps like keeping your fingers in motion as you age to like, and it's a soft material, so it's easy to manipulate, which is
Mhm.
good for like as you get older. So
I learned about something actually in preparing for this, Emily, that was really exciting, and I know you'll understand this. Whenever I've tried to teach people how to work on the wheel, it's frustrating because I think that's something that comes with practice. But the idea of radial symmetry, and I mentioned here, aid in achieving mindfulness and help reduce that feeling of disassociation. And when you're at the wheel, believe it or not, even though you want to, sit down and stare at it and try to center it, with your eyes closed, your elbows and your knees locked, you achieve that radial symmetry and that centeredness through your body. These are the things that you can achieve. It's not just squishing clay. And even though we're talking about clay tonight, I think a lot of us can also connect through this clay experience, because I think for a lot of us, our first creative experience is working with clay. Kind of introduced us to mixed media. I didn't start cutting and pasting a whole lot of stuff until I got into clay and stuck things to it. You know what I mean?
mhm. Yeah.
And so Emily, she has a background in Montessori. You grew up in Montessori education yourself, correct?
Yeah, from first through seventh grade, I was in a Montessori school. My sister, my dad, and my mom have many a years in the Montessori world, which is all about kind of guiding finding the independent interests in students and helping them discover all sorts of things, as well as like practical, like washing dishes or using eyedroppers. So it's a lot of like tactile hand-on experiences as
Mhm.
the students go, and even like learning, you have to like lay down cards to like learn different parts of like turkeys or the parts of a tree. So there's a lot of movement involved in the Montessori method and a lot of like independent learning.
Well, and that kind of like order of operation learning, the first, next, and last, I think is something that those who work with ceramics, especially if you're in a studio surrounded by other artists, there's a process in the studio where all of you, even though you're doing your own thing, there's kind of an order of operations that keeps it running smooth. And again, that kind of like learning lesson, whether it's in Montessori, that's a good life lesson. So good patient
Mhm.
ceramicists. And I like this picture too, by the way. This guy on the left, look how focused and absolutely he approves of that piece.
Oh yeah, and the like younger students always love and they always get so like involved when they're making something because they feel so like attached and proud of it. So it's a really good way to like boost confidence and have them explore like gravity and like actually construction that way.
What do you think about the idea of clay being, even though we all know that it's sturdy, especially once glazed and fired, but also it can be very forgiving but very unforgiving at the same time. So there's something about kids working with clay, I think, that gives them the opportunity for trial and error and
Mhm.
allowing for things to have those errors. And again, what a wonderful learning experience. Yay, clay. With the ceramic studio at South Shore Arts, I've been lucky enough to be part of 3 or 4 different studios, kind of in my adult years, in high school and college at Lincoln Square Pottery Studio in Chicago, and here at South Shore Arts. And I've noticed that when working in groups, it forms a very tight knit community, not only because I think ceramics benefit from having a tight knit community, not only because we were talking about kind of uh, the order of operations to keep things running smoothly. But I think that community, that society of learners, helps people to be able to promote what they're learning and bounce their ideas off of each other. And the items created can be functional and stand the test of time. Items can be generationally loved. And I think that that kind of like connector for us is also something in ceramics that I think people. And by the way, folks, when I talk about ceramics, and Emily, feel free to chime in on this, I think a lot of times when people talk about ceramics, they think vessels, cups and saucers, things that necessarily hold things. But tonight we're not going to just be talking about that. Historically, when I think of the ceramic studios or people creating ceramics, it was outside, it was out of necessity. Ceramic vessels for carrying water, um, ceremonial purposes. Most ceramic creations, they aided in defining their culture. Aspects, like I said before, aspects of human culture is defined as made by human hands. And this again starts to get me into the whole idea of the socialization aspect about what the topic you're going to bring to us tonight. But one thing that I definitely wanted to kind of hit home tonight is that I think ceramic artifacts, they've stood the test of time. They often show a culture's celebrations, ritual, and celebrational activities. Again, we talk about how history will show us that the pieces that we find were not always out of necessity, but they started to have things for religious traditions and celebrations. Um, And also, Emily brought this up to me a couple days ago about the communal aspect of sharing a meal. And although we do that together all the time, well, we try to do that with folks as much as we can nowadays, something like that, the process of creating the vessel, serving the food, and then sharing the meal, cleaning the plates, all of that, I think, is part of ceramics. Not just the kneading the clay, not just the bisquing of the clay, but the practice of ceramics and working with clay, it's developed alongside civilization. And my point with that is that up until now in this lecture, we focused a lot on the history and the ceramic artists and the mixed media artists, not even really mixed media, but the ceramics of history being, again, of necessity, showing things about tradition and culture. But now we're moving into the contemporary times with
Mhm.
artists, fabulous artists like Emily Casella, who I think nowadays, not just with ceramics, but I think nowadays a lot of art is in um, a reflection of what's going on. You know, it's not to function within, it's a comment about. A couple days ago, Emily and I were talking, and she said the process of ceramics itself is a communal act. And I, up until that point, had been having a really hard time kind of wanting to lock the history and the, you know, the early parts of ceramics to the lecture today. I wanted to really bring and bridge that. And so you really did that so nicely for me, Emily, and just the most wonderful little sentence. And I think this is why she's such a successful artist and teacher, because she really makes sense of a lot of things and says things so nicely. So tonight, I'm going to turn the floor over to Emily, and I'm going to chime in occasionally, but I would really love everybody to clap and welcome Emily Casella tonight
Oh,
for
thank you.
ceramics and confronting socialization.
Oh, great, thank you. So hello everyone. Today we're going to kind of look through how I kind of use this idea of like thinking about the history of ceramics and about how it has always been alongside human history. But so my ceramics that I make is all about figuring out people and people's backstories and the human side of existence. I just wanted to give a little bit of a background because you'll be hearing a lot of the background of my ceramic people as we go through the way my process of creating the body of work that I have made so far. And so, like we mentioned earlier, I have a background in Montessori, also grew up Catholic, and also grew up with a vegetarian upbringing, which is kind of this like dichotomy of um, kind of like a scientific way of looking at the world, as well as a more spiritual side of things, as well as vegetarianism can be an aspect of both of those, which you'll see being influenced in my work as we go along. I am a native to Northwest Indiana. I graduated from Portage, and I also graduated from IU Northwest in Gary in 2016 to get my Bachelor's of Fine Arts, where I focused my work on ceramics and photography. And then afterwards, I went to grad school where I got my master's in fine arts at the Herron School of Art and Design down in Indianapolis. And post school life was basically really when COVID happened in 2020. And so I was really fortunate enough to have jobs from Ivy Tech um, um, College in Valparaiso. And then I also then in the fall of 2020, um, I was I got into the IUN teaching for drawing and graphic design, which is what I started doing when the first year when I worked in Ivy Tech, and I still work with them today. I work now more so with the graphic design part of their programs. So they're both really great schools, and I love working for both of them. And then also during 2020, I was able to start working at the South Shore Arts, where I started off kind of like helping them with like technical stuff before we had a different studio person. And then I gradually went to work with the adults, and then I stuck with the children's. And then I've also done some workshops for Chesterton's South Shore Arts and the Labiznik Center. And then I also have an LLC where I do my art work through, as well as technical consulting for ceramic places around Northwest Indiana. Slide. Mm-hmm.
At what age did you start to like really say, I love art?
Oh, um, it so I've always had like art's always been a part of my life, especially at Montessori. My parents were fortunate enough to let me like draw on things, and then when I was like 3, and then they kind of like encouraged a more creative side with us, with both me and my sister. And then I had a really good art teacher at the Montessori school that would take us when the Millennium Park opened in downtown Chicago in like 2003. She took us there to see it, and then also the Art Institute of Chicago. So I have really early memories of seeing like the Bean and the Surrealists of that's at the Art Institute of Chicago. So that was kind of an early thing, but it was more so like a I didn't really know that I could like be an artist, or that was something like I could do. And then it wasn't until like I got into high school where the high school art department, especially Paula Weezy, kind of pushed me away from education degrees and then just to do full on art.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I did. I just dove right into doing art, and I haven't looked back in the
I was
last
just gonna say,
eight
you
years.
haven't
So
looked back.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so this was my BFA show, and at that time I was exploring this idea of like mental consequences and mental psyches that television and like the outside worlds create inside of people. And so these I set up this kind of living room scene, and with throughout it you would go around and like investigate each piece, and that's something that I've continued to do. I like the interactiveness of ceramics. I'm not a pottery person, but I use the sculptures as a vessel to tell stories as well as talk about social issues.
Mhm.
And so in this one, I was interested a lot in like fictitious fears that then turn real, as well as how people talking about different neighborhoods or different parts of different towns would like create these like stigmas against each other, and like how do you really justify what's true or not, and because everything is the same, everybody just wants to live and continue to live and survive. And so we always create these like negative connotations about things that don't really serve us as a society. And so I chose this idea of like this mother and son
Mhm.
looking at this television. And so both of them are seeing the same images, but then the son is like super excited and it's like, oh, this is great. And so in the back of their head is like a little scene of what they're thinking about. And then with the mother, it's very like overwhelming and like anxiety inducing to like see all of these things that are being presented on television and then having to worry about the kid.
Yeah.
Um, and so those are the things I was thinking about and discussing at that time. And this was really mostly about television, which as we'll see, has I switched to like social media as we go along, but it's always like this isolation of like being in your house versus what the outside world was conveying, or how you felt about the outside world
Mhm.
versus the inside world. So
Let's
yeah, I
specify
think
too.
yeah.
I'm sorry, let's specify too. I didn't realize this, but a lot of your pieces, people would have to see these in person, of course, to really fully appreciate them, but the back of their heads are hollow, right?
Yeah.
And you can
Yeah,
see them
it's
from the other
hollow and
side.
then there's images inside. Yeah, it is. And that's something that I'm really striving for, is this idea of people coming towards something and then like learning about it that way,
Very
which we'll discuss
interactive.
more like as we get into my my later works.
Mhm.
But that this is where like this idea of that started from. Okay, so these two pieces are separate, but the one was about like this idea of neighborhoods and like putting up like hobo signs if something was safe or unsafe, which is something that society always likes to do, is like carve in something or like stamp something in to signify where to go, or if something is safe or not. And
Mhm.
then I put in photographs, and that's really what started my like mixed media investigations, which this is a clear vellum of a picture I took, and then it's lit up in the inside so that it illuminates from the back.
Like right here is where you're talking about. So there's a light coming from the back to kind of make this illuminate. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the pictures are also in the Bureau of Apprehension, but these pictures I was kind of being like a little bit humorous with, and like thinking about like common tropes in television about that signify fear. So I had one that I did not include, but it was a person in a shower scene, like at the Alfred Hitchcock movie Psycho, where they're getting like hit with a knife, but then the person is like looking through and being like, "What are you doing with the knife being here?" And so it's kind of like these irrational fears that television would like puts into our psyche. And sometimes it's like granted, but then other times it's like, well, how many oftentimes is that going to happen in our lives? And why are we so worried about these things? Because a scary movie put it into our minds. So
Yeah,
all of
real
the
life
like
is so much
little,
more
oh
fearful, fearful.
yeah. And so all of the little opening drawers have a different picture inside, and that's also what started my investigation with drawers, which I continue to strive to make in ceramics. So this is my grad my master's thesis show. And this is where I really kind of took off with this idea of people coming towards other people to learn about each other,
Mhm.
as well as how they are like actual people interact with others, and trying to figure out this way to make connections through through observation of how we perceive others. And so going back to the Montessori aspect, I broke this down into 5 different people that kind of were based on the fundamental needs of society, which is a Montessori thing that children learn. And it's usually when you're younger, it's like the fundamental needs of people, which is a transportation, shelter, some sort of spiritual or religious organization, a government, and then also this aspect of like time and clothing. And so this installation kind of pushed me to really think about how to not only navigate a space, but also how to like navigate the viewers to go through and do their own exploration, which in the next slide, we have a really good image of people like exploring the work.
Mhm.
And so this was a candid photo that my sister took during the opening. And you can just see, like, I love this photo because you can just see how intensely people are staring at my pieces and like really trying to understand what's going on. And I love like giving something for people to like investigate and kind of figure out themselves.
Yeah.
Um, so that's
I
quite
love.
exciting. And it's just so exciting to get people to like, you know, really look at what I made. So
I love the woman in the middle. That's how I feel when I look at your artwork. She looks so happy and she's just glad to be there looking at it. And that's how I feel too.
oh, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. So this well, now we're going to start talking about my people, and this it started this movement of like my society of people, which has now morphed into like drawings as well as ceramics, which we'll see later on. But here we have the time critter and the consumer, and this is where I started to incorporate video into my work. So I have a small projector in the hands of the sculpture, and then it goes into the middle, and then we have this advertisement. So the story of the time critter is this person happens upon this advertisement that is for this time critter that captures these photographs or moments that you want to maybe remember. And so this company made it to kind of like fulfill this need. But then as the story goes along in the video, you realize that, well, this time critter is like coming at these maybe not so exciting times in your life. And like, what do you want to remember versus what you don't want to remember?
Yeah.
And then when you first encounter the time critter, it gives you just like the small stack of postcard sized photographs.
Mhm.
And then each time it comes, it takes one away. And as the story stops or like comes to a close, the person realizes that you can only remember so many things, and then having something try to remember it for you is not going to be as like useful or interesting as if you were to kind of like curate it yourself. And so at the end, the person explodes into a ceramic photograph sculpture, which is what you see there. So that's kind of like bringing in this humor to my work, but also it's kind of like a dark thing about like what happens after you pass away, which is something I think about, especially with ceramics, where it's used a lot of the times for um, like cremation, which is also like a ceramic in itself because you're going into like a kiln essentially.
Yeah.
So how you get remembered really comes down to what you do in life. So that was what that one was about.
The time critter
Um,
makes me think about viewfinders like that, and it would have the little slide in it that would play the different pictures of it.
mhm.
And it also makes me think about that saying, what is it? Life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. And so
Yes.
if the time critter just sort of like captures those mundane moments that we may not normally say, hey, I need to capture that. Those are the ones though that when the time critter catches them, you're glad he did. Is it a boy or a
Yeah.
girl? Is the time critter a boy or a girl? We didn't establish that. Does it
Um,
matter? No.
no, it doesn't matter. It just kind of they're just, sometimes it matters and sometimes it doesn't, but the time critter is just like a more like a machine than anything else, really. So
Believe it. It's my
yeah,
favorite.
so now this was part of the religious center, and this really kind of started my investigation into performance as well as becoming part of the Society of Ceramics with how I painted my skin with face paint to match the way that I put on the brush strokes of underglaze with my
Mhm.
ceramic pieces. And so this really brought together the vegetarianism and like Catholicism aspect, where it's making this religious smoothie experience. And it also plays with this idea of like ASMR, which is a YouTube sensation, where it's all about like auditory responses and stimulation. And so I kind of used that to have to create the sounds for it, which is which you have a sound of,
I do.
which we can take a listen to.
Cindy Sherman, that when I
Mhm.
saw this, everybody at home, that is what this made me think of, especially when you were talking about your application of your makeup on your skin to look like when you, for those of you at home that don't know, when you paint on glaze, sometimes the more you put on, it's got a real painterly kind of almost layering to it. And so when you see her up close, and if you look here on the slides, you can see her skin looks like that too. It's beautiful.
Okay, so the way out was talking about transportation, and I also used sound with this one. The previous one was in a headphone, so you get more of that like movement throughout your head. But this one was about traveling and kind of going this idea of like looping, which is was prevalent in all of my pieces, and it's also with this idea of like you have to move around the piece to figure it out. So you encounter this person who's like laying down, and they don't really care that you're here, which the other ones do kind of have this element of wanting you to like know what happened or want you to, or like with the religious center, they want you to make this or to for you to have this to have a better life.
Mhm.
Which this one is just like they're in their own world, they don't really care about who's there or who's not there. So then the viewers have to kind of like explore the carvings on the back of the piece to really figure out this person's life. So it goes from the train station to the train away from the city and then back to like a house or a hotel. And
Mhm.
it's kind of like this repetition of this overwhelming feeling of wanting to be somewhere else than where you currently are. And
Mhm.
then this also has a headphone in to really hone this idea of, well, we don't really know what they're thinking or listening to, but it's not anything that we're hearing or we're experiencing when we encounter the piece.
Where did you find a kiln big enough to fire this guy?
Yeah, that was during grad school, so we had some big oval kilns, but IUN also has some big kilns too.
I love that he's hollow on the inside, on both sides, and you can just kind of get in there and just it's like he doesn't really care if you're there or not, but he's lying there exposed. He's hollow for you to look inside and see what's in there and learn his story. So,
Yeah, and I use like the black glaze to kind of be this like gap of information, so you don't have to see the whole thing to understand like who this person is or like get the full scope of who they are,
hmm.
but you then kind of perceive them just by the limited information you have, which is how we experience most interactions with others. So yeah, so this is going to be kind of what is gearing my stuff towards now, is this idea of subway and like interactions there, but we're going to get closer to that towards the end. So
I almost kind of, your work is one that I appreciate. I think I've told you I do dollhouse miniatures, and there's
mhm.
something nice about things that are small when you want to just get real close, peek inside, very intimate, those little magical worlds within all those little spaces. It's really special.
Yes, that's so cool that you do dollhouse miniatures. Um, and then this one is the Watchman, who is the most popular out of the group of these Society of People. And so this one really kind of honed in this idea of mental thoughts in terms of how we kind of trap ourselves in these cycles due to whatever kind of backstory we have. And so this is a fictitious story for the Watchman and his background, but in his shoulders, he has, when he was younger, he witnessed a car crash by his house, but then also like found like a trail of blood on the sidewalk. And so the people who were reporting those things he was very interested in. And so he took it upon himself to then report everything that he sees out his window in the neighborhood or wherever he's living. So all of the little tiles on his house is just the notes that he wrote and then just like floats to the top of his house. And so it's just like today, what's one like today many went home early because of weather. And so like it doesn't really tell us anything specific, so people who were to look at this later on in time wouldn't really get what was happening. So it's this idea of like the need to report is so overwhelming, but then it's also frivolous, which is kind of how I think about like social media, about how we always want to like update people about what's happening, especially in the 2010s.
Yeah.
But then it's also kind of like not one person could ever capture everything. And if you look at somebody's tweet, you know, if you haven't been following them or anything, it's not going to mean anything to you, regardless. So that's kind of how he became a story. But he also is the one who like is the first thing you see when you enter this space. And so he's watching you, and then you're watching him, and then on his little card on his hand says, "A stranger looked at me today," or "Today a stranger looked at me," which is then acknowledging the viewer that's looking at him. So
I think he's so successful for a couple reasons, not only just because of the backstory, but just I think I look at him, and now that I know more about you, I right away look at the application of the glaze and the way that it's applied, and I know that surrounding it is clouds, and it kind of represents on his face too, isn't it? A little bit with clouds.
yeah.
But the expression that you managed to get on his face is so good. He's judgy, he's a little irritated, but he's a little bit insecure, and also just the pose of the hand, which I think everybody knows. Hands are the worst to draw and create. They're
Yeah.
so hard.
Yeah, and the cloud thing is going to come into play about this idea of this mental image. So it's not really his house, but just like this building that he's this mind like house that he's put himself into, and this barrier between like what he's thinking versus what is actually present. So it's all about his inner thoughts with that.
His head's in the clouds.
Yeah.
Ooh.
And yeah, and so post his existence in the park of infinite connections, he has been in many different public buildings. And so he stayed in a year stay at the Deerfield, Illinois town hall, where it was in the place where people go to like fill out tax forms or like go complain about something. So I thought that was a hilarious choice for him to be there, kind of like watching over this like government building. And then over this summer, he was at the Portage Library in the teen section, which was also very exciting because I love Portage's library. So it was quite the dream come true when we could have a piece inside there. So he's been traveling around, and he's probably the most popular one to go different places. He was also at South Shore at the last annual Salon show in 2020. So he's made his rounds around Northwest Indiana. I'm trying to find him a new spot to go, but he's getting catched up now by the smoothie center. So we'll see where they go next.
Well, he commands your attention no matter what, even from the inside of that little box. He's just looking at you. I love it.
So what I started to do right before the pandemic actually hit, I did this piece, which was Reminded of Death, Shocked and Upset in 2020 of January, which is like just when things were starting to like come to like Seattle in the United States. But during that time, like my family also got sick with we don't know if it was COVID or not, but we all got really sick before we traveled for the last time in 2 years to Texas and New Orleans. And so it was really kind of shocking how sick I felt. And then I also just turned 25. So then you also have this like idea of like, a quarter of your life has passed. So there's a lot of like thinking about those things. So I did colored pencil drawing, which I kind of abandoned drawing in general after my junior year of undergrad, because it wasn't like we just weren't getting along, and I was focused more on ceramics and photography. But because I have so many supplies here in my space at home, that I just picked it up and wanted to like really talk about those things. And then I also started to incorporate boards in different areas of the drawings I did, which I did I think about 8 drawings um, during the 2020 time, and they're all exploring this idea of like hiding words to kind of create this idea of what the person was thinking during that. And then also I explored some more with the face paint, and I did Anxious Ringer, which was the March of 2020. And so that was because we were having so much problems with politics during that time, and it was going to be when the new election was happening. There's always seemed to be like somebody you're calling, like if it was, a family member to see if they were okay, or a past friend, or just so many calls were happening, or like people are telling you to like call your representatives.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking about those things, and that I did this photo set with a video the Tuesday before the thing shut down that Friday, which is all very serendipitous. But the next day I went downtown to go to a meeting for the Contemporary Museum of Art for the teacher education meeting thing. I forget what it was called, which ended up getting shut down because of COVID. But the last time we went downtown for 2 years basically was going for a teacher thing. And then the next day I go to the grocery store and there's nothing in the aisles. So I was like, okay, things are really amping up now. So that was kind of, again, these two serendipitous pieces. What do you say?
It all came down real quick, didn't it?
Yeah. And so those are really kind of these like snapshots of the time right before. So
And again, with those beautiful brush strokes, can I ask you a question for the shocked and upset on the side? Was this done on a foam core board like the next pieces?
No, so this was actually just on regular drawing
This one
paper.
too, okay.
Yeah, and so this one as well. So this, I was starting to go into investigating more about subways, because I do love traveling, as well as like traveling on transportation. And I think it's really interesting the interactions you may or may not have with other people during your transportation there. And so I also incorporate this idea of like we actually never spoke, which I then use color versus just the graphite to distinguish this idea of what is still there versus what is not there. And so like on this, we have the subway cars aren't going to really change, but the people inside are always changing and moving. So it's about this transportation movement. And just like ceramics are vessels to convey thoughts and like transport thoughts, subways are also ways to like move things around and like bring things forward. So
you made that connection the other day, and it was another time where I'm like, you just blew my mind. It was just it's funny how, the thoughts that we have on the subway, while just mindlessly thinking those kind of abstract thoughts we have, other people have them too. That's why talking to other creatives and having those creative places are so important.
Yeah. Oh, somebody in the chat, Kinsman was saying that it's like the sleeper figure, which is the way out piece, just inside out. Which
Oh,
yes,
yes, I see that.
yeah. And so that's really what I'm focusing now, moving forward with my next like installation that's going to happen. I'll announce more things later. But so it's kind of like exploring this idea of like how we perceive things in using transportation as like a vehicle to do so. And then I did this experimentation in 2021, and I was doing smaller experimentations with this, but I was using a foam core board, which is just like the like archival archival sister to like the actual foam core things you would like use for like school presentations, but this is like you can keep it forever.
Okay.
And so I had a bunch of that laying around because my mom ordered it from a teacher site. And so I was experimenting with the carving into it using the colored pencils. And so it's kind of like a bas relief
Yeah.
where it's um a short in indentation
Mm-hmm.
um of the pieces, and like you can't really see it in the photograph, but you can kind of see by the neck to the chin of the green portion that it's kind of coming forward, and when you see it in real life it really does look like it's three-dimensional, and when you move around it it changes um in how the depth is being perceived.
Mm-hmm.
And so I found this quote when I was listening to the TV about like to stop the spread of the virus we need to stop moving, and I was thinking about like how do we as a society stop moving, which is something that people are now really thinking about in terms of like this overwhelming need for them to go to space for no reason. And so it's like, why are we leaving this earth when there's so much things we have to like keep with it? But we can't stop progress, or like how do we stop that when we have so many things we want to create? So in this society, like in my society of people, I then created this like street of this very overwhelming patterned shaped buildings, thinking about like what could buildings look like if we didn't have like limited resources, and like how like beautiful we could make it. But then it's contrasted by this very solemn tree that has no leaves,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like warning us like to stop moving, we need to like to stop the spread, we need to stop moving. And so it's also taking like climate change and like how if we ignore like the plants to keep creating human things, then we're going to have an issue. And so which
Human
this is
beings.
a fact I mentioned the other day about how in cities they only plant male trees,
Yep.
and then in some, not all cities but most cities, they'll only plant the male tree, which I didn't even know trees had male or female, but because they didn't want the trees to like seed or spread like helicopter plants around,
Yeah.
which I thought that was like very
Hmm.
bizarre and like patriarchal. And so it's like we have this overwhelming like masculine energy of like wanting to build things, but then we have like the nature saying, well, you need to stop or things are going to happen. So
There's always this odd thing about humans desperately needing to make their mark and be seen, whether it's going to space with whether they need to or whatever. But this, I
yeah,
don't want to off on a tangent or anything, but this
right.
piece here on the wood bark, I think that if you can, I'd love to see this in person sometime. And you said something a minute ago that really stuck out and is a good segue into our next slide, actually, about how during quarantine you used some materials that you had on hand out of necessity because that's what you had when you were in quarantine and weren't able to go out. And so that brings us to something that Emily and I have been talking about, and we just we wanted to bring it up. And we were talking about COVID-19 quarantine and the impact on the creative space and the process. And so that to me kind of brought up the ideas of people who maybe haven't had a chance to be creative in the past, have had time and maybe have found a creative outlet while they've had this time off, find out what makes them creatively tick. Um, and one of the things I'll pick your brain about and also ask the audience to think about when you're creating, what are the benefits of solitude versus the strain of isolation? Did you feel both? Do you think there's a balance? I'll say from personal experience during COVID quarantine, my own artwork reflected a lot of personal stuff, and it was almost a little too much. I had the strain of isolation got to be a little too deep. How about you? What did you find?
Um, yeah, my sister says I was going on my soul journey over the past 2 years, trying to like look at all these like self-help books and thinking about like your place in the world and whatnot. And I think that a lot of people have experienced that as well. And I think someone in the chat says for me, the isolation made it difficult for me to create it all. Yeah, which I think, which is, like I took a break from making ceramics for the past kind of 2 years. I was kind of like filling with things, but it really, you had to really like stop and think about like, even if you didn't have time to think about like what to do, because we're all like in a survival mode. So it's very hard to like make art when you're trying
Mm-hmm.
to survive, I mean. So that's thinking. Oh wait, also Trayvon says, who is my student, says solitude gave me more time to do stuff I wanted to do, but completely isolating myself made me kind of bored with life. Yeah, you know, and that's something to think about too. It's like, you know, all of these like just being in the same place all the time is really kind of boring after a while. And you have to create new ways of trying to entertain yourself because you couldn't really go out or go see friends.
And,
Um,
with the idea of media kind of in the onslaught of information that was overwhelming, the impact of all of that on the psyche and then creating, everybody probably went to all different places. Art as therapy can take you in many different directions. And, not everybody realizes what a good creative, how important it is to have a creative outlet,
yeah, and
especially going, I'm sorry.
no, no, I was gonna say, yeah, some other people are just chatting
Mhm.
in the chat, and so Pam says, I don't really feel isolated because you can always go on online and somebody's always there. Yeah, um, which is so funny because I mean, I've been on the internet since like 2008, and
Mhm.
so it was funny to see how people caught up with like doing things virtually online,
Yeah.
in the past year and a half.
Yep, out of
Um,
necessity. It's amazing what you
mhm.
just learn so quick. And you know what that makes me think about, Emily? Without having this brave new world of the internet as a place, and I don't mean to sound like, studio time with your community is the only way to do it. You're the virtual community, huge. And that's the way of the future. And so, one thing I want to say to the audience, one thing I'm going to try to do, especially during our virtual presentations, is I want to always end them by asking our guest tonight about 4 or 5 contemporary artists that they think are super duper important that we should know about, and they're going to tell us why. And I can tell you that the first person on Emily's list is somebody that she wouldn't have known without the power of the internet and Instagram. Is that how you became familiar
Yeah.
with our 4 contemporaries? I love this slide. It makes me happy. It's just filled with a variety of really great stuff. And these were the 4 artists that Emily brought to our attention. So, Emily, take it away. Why is Charles Cook awesome?
Okay, so Charles Cook, I'm so glad we included him
Mm-hmm.
because he I think reached out to me and like followed me first, and then I noticed his um castles that he make out of ceramics using basically a stoneware with an iron oxide to create the different levels of darkness and lightness with
Mm-hmm.
the red to black. And he just makes a ton of these castles. And he's just the sweetest person. And he'll just like comment on things. And when others comment on his stuff, he's just so happy. And so I don't exactly know like where he is from. But he was a delight to find during 2020. And I just think his uh detail and like
Oh.
his intricate brickwork. I love a good brick. My students know this. I love bricks. Um, and so he just goes to town with the bricks and then creates these openings with the windows.
Oh.
And he's his work is about like reclaiming these places that maybe weren't accessible to other people in where people lived at the time, like during the Middle Ages, these kind of isolated things. So he's kind of reclaiming this idea of kingdoms
Mhm.
through his own work and like as who he is as a person. So I just think they're amazing.
Well, they look like Rivendell to me, and I want to go there. And I love the quote that I saw on his Instagram. When I'm building a clay castle, it's not the end result I seek. It's a journey I want not to end, though it must. Good stuff. Oh,
Yes. Okay, and then okay, Jamie Bates Slum is um probably the most famous one we have on here. She's really like taken off. And so I found her when I was working in when I was doing my undergrad and like trying to find artists to like relate to.
mhm.
And she and the other person on the slide were like my lifeline because she incorporated video projections onto her ceramic people. And so she really deals with like mental health issues. And the series that I first was introduced to her for was about generational cancer surviving throughout
Her
her
family,
on
right?
her mother's side.
Yeah.
And so she kind of like took this idea of like the morphing of body parts,
Mm.
as well as like projecting onto these like scans of I don't even know what the scans are called, but like whatever the scans you have to do for cancer things, she
Mm.
projected them onto her ceramics to create these kind of like nebulous things. So and now, okay, you I'm not sure if it's kind of appropriate to share what she's doing now, but go follow her on Instagram, go look at her website because she's doing these really amazing new work that's all about like women empowerment and like reclaiming your body and whatnot. So she's inspirational to me. So exciting.
I'm always really blown away by anybody who can capture an expression so well. All right.
Oh, yes. And then the Hermannsburg Pottery Association is a community of, I'm not sure how to pronounce this, but they're indigenous, it's a group of indigenous women who were part of the um indigenous population of Australians, which is now what we call Australia. Um, but what they're doing at this place is creating these board vessels. And so this is a huge community of these older senior citizen women
Mm-hmm.
who are making pottery, who are making things based on the landscape which they are from in Australia. And the thing about ceramics is that all the cultures around the world in the different continents had some form of ceramics,
Yep.
but in Australia, especially on the in the island itself, they didn't have a lot of ceramic makers as things we see like in Mesoamerica or um like in Asia. What happened was most of the things that they were making were made out of wood. And it wasn't until about the 1850s that ceramics really took off and became part of everyday life for them, as like people making themselves and not like importing it from other places. And so this group of indigenous women are like reclaiming that um, sentiment and like using it now to create native animals, native plants, and then creating selling them to get money to support the indigenous communities in Australia. And they also have Instagram, and they're amazing to just go and see. I love a good parakeet, and and a lot of them are on that those vessels.
I love Australian art, and I know that's we were talking about Tommy Watson on a past Art and Focus, and something I noticed, and this isn't just, it's not something that's just in Australia, but what I love about the work there, especially with the pottery, are the colors, the vibrancy, especially the stuff that comes from the earth. You can't not have bright reds, oranges, and yellows, and of course all the nature that goes into their work too. It's absolutely beautiful, and again, it's that community aspect of
Mhm.
coming together and creating the. It's really nice.
Yeah, it's so magical.
It is. That's the word of the day, magical.
Oh, and then wait, so this is Norelli Stern, and okay, so she's from Toronto, and there's so many great Toronto artists. Just go look them up, especially contemporary ceramic artists. But she was also that same time when I found Jamie Bates Sloan, um, and so what she talks about is nature, but also this idea of creating porcelain artifacts of things throughout time. And then she created this series, which is how I found her, where she created these tree trunks and then projected inside the video. And I saw that in 2013, not 2013, excuse me, 2014. And then it wasn't until 2020, no, excuse me, 2019, which I was able to do a video installation as well. So I was thinking about doing that from her work. And and so now what she's doing is collaborating with this other artist, which I forget the name of, but she did this thing called Whale's Tale, where she incorporated poetry and then created this multi-pieced installation of like a decomposing whale skeleton and talking about the environmental impact that animals experience and how to kind of like scientifically study those. She also does like creates little porcelain slip critters
Mm-hmm.
and then like mice and other small animals, and then kind of groups them together to create this larger collective of items.
Well, see,
Yeah.
and that's a really good place to end tonight because we began talking about pottery throughout history and the purpose of it. And we're ending on what I consider to be, and maybe you agree, pottery of protest. Reactionary pottery and ceramics, and I use pottery as a general term, and I need to use the right verbiage. It's ceramics, things made out of ceramic clay, hand built, whether it's on the wheel or not. But what I love about her stuff is and you say she's making comments about the environment, but I think that kind of on the flip side of how delicate her pieces are,
Mhm.
say a whole lot. I really do. I think that they're so nicely done, and frankly, I want to touch it.
Yeah, it's very textured as well as fragile. That's kind of a lot of ceramics likes this idea of like the fragility of clay and like how that relates to like life and living.
Hmm.
Um, and then oh wait, yeah, so that's yeah, so there we go.
Well, are you
So
one to keep a sketchbook?
listen, this is not a good advice for my students, but I really don't keep a sketchbook. If anything, I'll like keep notes.
Hmm.
And then I'll like envision what I want, and then I'll do like some like body pose stuff, and
Yeah.
then I'll go into like just building it,
Hmm.
which is not good for my students to hear, but it's
Do as I say, not as
yeah,
I do. That's my famous saying.
right. But they've inspired me to actually start investigating sketchbook making more.
Oh.
But yeah, everybody's different.
Well, Emily, again, I'm going to say it, you're awesome, and your students are lucky to have you as a teacher. You put things into really clear and great terms, and it makes you think, and that's what art's about. So thank you.
Yes. Hmm.
Take care,
Th
everybody. Have a super
Thank you.
night. Take care. Stay creative, everybody.